Hi, I'm Andrew Tsao. In this episode of Backstory, we're going to see a trailer for the film Back to the Garden, a documentary that explores the lives and values of a group of back-to-the-land hippies. Filmmaker Kevin Tomlinson shot hours of interviews with one such group in the late 1980s at a healing gathering in eastern Washington. The resulting footage sat untouched for nearly 20 years until Kevin decided to reconnect with the group and find out how the decades may or may not have changed their ideals and their lives. Kevin, welcome to Backstory. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Kevin, if I recall right, we're talking 68, 69 Summer of Love, right? That's what the...
Well, 67 was the Summer of Love.
Okay, and 69 Moon Landing.
And
right?
Woodstock.
Yeah, okay, Woodstock. There
right.
we go. 88, so basically a 20-year span. They're gathering in eastern Washington.
Yeah.
You're there, and you capture all this footage, and then we'll talk a little about that 20-year span from there to the making of this. But what was that time span all about? I mean, you know, it's such an interesting set of moments, right? From the 60s to the 80s to the ultimate making of the film. What's that all about?
Well, that's kind of what got me inspired to bring out my camera and ask if I could record it, because in 1988, Woodstock seemed like a distant memory, frankly.
Yeah.
And yet here were almost 400 or 500 people with, you know, camped out in teepees and magic buses and something that looked like, you know, out of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, in this beautiful place in the middle of nowhere in eastern Washington. And singing songs, dancing, the smell of patchouli, you know, beads. I just thought, wow, how did they keep this together after over 20 years when everybody was saying, oh, hippies are dead.
Yeah.
That whole thing was a fad.
Yeah, yeah. And then just talk a little bit about the moment after it's completed and you said to yourself, you know, why isn't the film out in 89 then? What happens in the ensuing 20 years?
Well, you know, after shooting all these interviews and all the dancing, and this was a healing gathering, and it was a free event. It didn't cost anything to go. There was a communal kitchen. I mean, it was very much steeped in the idealism of the 60s, and I was frankly very impressed with that.
Now, this went over a course of days?
This was like a long weekend, like a Thursday through a Sunday.
And you basically just became a participant, I guess.
Right. A participant with a camera, nonetheless. Yeah. But actually, it was shot over from 88 and then also again in 89. Okay. I combined the 2 years healing gatherings together.
Okay.
But when I looked at the footage, I thought, you know, because I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of like, okay, am I creating a film here or am I just documenting this for posterity? Right. And I think it was pretty much more on just a gut instinct that I felt like this needs to be recorded. Yeah. So after looking at the footage with a friend, we were kind of both shaking our heads like, no one is going to be interested in listening to what these people have to say. You know, they're talking about peace, love, living in harmony, sustainable lifestyles, defending the earth, the joys of simple living. Yeah. And I just thought in the midst of Reagan, you know, Ronald Reagan's America in 1988 and 89, when Wall Street was the most popular film in our movie theaters, who's going to listen to anybody talking about downshifting and downsizing in order to be happy and live a more sustainable life? So I just put it away.
And then what was it that brought you back to it?
Well, I never completely lost sight of it. It always bugged me to no end to know that those tapes were lying in the basement, basically decomposing through several moves that I made. And I thought, you know, I know there's something there. I know there's a movie, there's something. But it took, as in so many things in life, often when we start projects, it takes somebody else outside of you to kind of bring you back to to the project, and that was the case here. I met a producer in Amsterdam who does children's documentaries, and when we talked about the possibility of working together on a project, she asked me what kind of things I'd like to work on, and I mentioned this old footage, and she practically went crazy when she heard me talk about this and said, "You've got to send me that. You've got to show me some of this stuff, and then let's look at it." And that's what got me to finally go down there, pull the tapes out, put them in, and start writing down some of the sound bites. And it was just astonishing how timely the conversation was now in today's context.
And I find it really interesting. Underneath that, there's almost a sense of, it's been said that art can't be forced, that it comes when it's ready. And your own personal journey, I'm sure, from the time you made the initial foray into it to 20 years later, you had your own life. And so coming back to it after 20 years, you in fact were able to look at it with fresh eyes as well.
I think so. I think it was meant to be in a lot of ways, that it had to sit.
Yeah.
And some people have said that it wasn't that the film wasn't ready for us. It's that we weren't ready for the film. We weren't ready for that message back in 1988, but we certainly are now.
Well, talking about being ready for it, when you decided to recontact these people, were they surprised? Were they reluctant? What sort of discoveries happened for you in reconnecting when you went back and said, "Remember me? I was there 20 years ago. I'd like to revisit all of this." Tell me a little about that story.
Well, they were very receptive, first of all, and it wasn't as difficult a process as most people might think. I contacted the same community co-op in Tonasket, where I had initially found out about the Healing Gathering, and said, "Remember me? I was there 20 years ago." And of course, no, they didn't remember me, but
really,
I was looking for a particular person who had kind of championed the idea that I could go ahead and film there, because at the time it wasn't all that popular of an idea or notion for me to be walking around with this big camera on my shoulder. It wasn't like today where you've got these little, mini cams or handy cams. I had this big shoulder cam and a separate deck and a big tripod. I stuck out. And so I needed permission. I needed to ask if everybody was okay with it. And frankly, a lot of people weren't okay with it. There was a lot of feeling like, well, or maybe you're some kind of a narc with the FBI.
Or you're setting us up to
trying
be
to bust us. So there was a lot of that to overcome, and frankly, we did overcome that. But it took a little convincing. But the person who had championed me then, I was looking for him, because I felt like if he knows that I'm doing this, he'll remember me. And sure enough, I got through to him via the co-op in Tonasket. They contacted him by email and said, "Hey, there's this guy who made this film. Would you be willing to talk to him?" And that's how it all started. But fast forward from that to this, the healing gatherings really aren't happening so much now, because they really never made a lot of money. It was all volunteerism. And people got tired of doing all of that because it was so much work. But the other fair that this same community of people put on is called the Barter Fair. And it was started in 1974, and it's grown from about 400 people to over 10,000 people today who annually come to this event.
And it's a market of some kind that's based on barter.
Yeah, it's basically people exchanging things without money. At least that was the initial idea. You can pay money for things, but you can also barter goods for goods. And very idealistic, again, like from the 60s, but it worked. And this allowed people to get by without having to have a lot of cash. Fast forward to 2006, after putting together some sound bites and some footage, I took this on my laptop to the Barter Fair, and I basically asked where these people were, and I was pointed in a certain direction, and I found them, and I said, "Can I show you this?" And when they saw it, they were They were happy. They were singing the songs that they had sung back 20 years ago.
This is their first encounter with themselves from 20 years ago, out of the blue at the Barter Fair.
Exactly. And many of them had completely forgotten that I'd interviewed them. Yeah. Sometimes they had their grown children with them now who were looking at the same footage, and they were amazed.
Yeah, the little kids that are running around.
Exactly.
The film, I thought about it after I was watching it, and I was telling someone, "Oh, I'm watching a documentary called Back to the Garden," and I went, "No, it's not a documentary. It's a chronology. No, it's an anthropological study because it really examines a subculture. No, it's actually the structure of the film. How did you decide on it? Because it kind of defies categorization in that way."
Well, I think it's all of the above.
Okay.
You know, it's almost like an ethnographic film in some ways.
Yeah.
And you know, the sort of the lost tribe of hippies.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, they're not lost.
Right.
I mean, certainly they're unique being out there, but you know, they're indicative of many groups around the country and around the world that still exist.
Yeah.
So it's all those things. And
so when you got to the point where you had to decide the sort of narrative structure, if you will, you know, should I start in the past? Should I flash back? How do I create the sections for it? How did you come up with that?
You know, that's a good question. I felt like it had to be done in short bites because of the basically limited attention span today that I think exists. And so I wanted it to be personal stories. I wanted it to be made up of interviews with this group of main characters. I think there's 6 main characters in our story. And I wanted it to kind of start off with the original gathering in 88 and then take you forward to today and where are they now. But as that unfolds, we really find out a lot about these people and their lives and what's gone on in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And further, we interview their children as well to find out what has the impact been on their children.
That's a very particularly fascinating area. It brings home this idea. You know, so few of us are able to literally look back, you know, right there on who we were, and especially the idea, you know, our viewers will see in the film. You see babes in arms in the footage in the beginning, and then, you know, I got a chance to meet them 20 years later in your film, and their reflections are absolutely fascinating as well.
Yeah.
So
I think that's one of the real strengths of our film, and a lot of people comment about, wow, it was really great to see the young people interviewed and talking about their experience being raised as hippie kids and how they look back on it. When you talk about influences and how I came up with it, with the style or the format, I'm a big fan of Then and Now, and the Michael Apted series 7 Up
was 21 up, 35 up. I
think we're up to 49 up, and soon to be 56 up now.
But that was pretty groundbreaking in terms of the, you know, sort of dedication to following these people in England over literally their lifetimes, and I think that. That definitely sort of, I thought of that as well when I was watching the film.
Yeah, some people call it a hippie 7 Up. But that film, and there are several others, a film called The Same River Twice by Rob Moss, were definite influences on, remember this is the first documentary that I've done. I've worked as a cameraman for many, many years. And I think the other inspiration for getting back to this project was, frankly, I wanted to do my own film after having worked on so many other people's projects.
Right. Well, now let's take a look at the trailer for Back to the Garden.
Would I have called myself a hippie back in 88 or 89 or 86 or 76 or 66?
Highly involved people practicing inner evolvement.
The term has been so compromised and misunderstood and abused.
Looked at pictures in Life magazine of hippies, you know, and found that really appealing and knew that I didn't want the life my parents had.
Ended up living in a teepee in Oregon and connecting spiritually.
We haven't defined what is a hippie. Was Jesus a hippie?
I've never been ashamed to be a hippie.
We were all about being flower children, being about love.
Hippies are kind of known as tree huggers, right?
You know, I always equated it with folk that wanted to live simply, wanted to live close to the earth.
Try to give as little money as possible to killing people.
Being about against the war, trying to build a better world.
Wanted to farm, wanted to raise their kids.
Try not to participate in corporate America.
They just really slandered us. And so as a result, many people today do not want to use the term, but I'm actually still very comfortable with the term. You know, I think hippie's fine.
I really want to see you. Really want to be with you. Really want to see you, Lord, but it takes so long, my Lord.
Well, I live in a school bus without power, without running water, without electricity. That's kind of a hippie lifestyle.
I'd watched my parents struggle in the whole middle class trap. And kind of early on, I decided, you know, you only have freedom if you're rich or you're poor enough that you don't care.
We are scattered, we are golden, we are hearted, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Kevin, after viewing the film, I'm now thinking about what's going on today and the Occupy movement.
Right.
You hear about things like we're entering the age of authenticity, humanity's ready for a sea change, things that the characters in the film were talking about in '88, and then when you made the film, sustainable lifestyle, being responsible for your own energy usage. You know, of course, in '88, when you originally got the footage, this was probably a foreign language to a lot of people. Yet today, it seems more timely than ever. I'm sure as you were realizing this, it raised a lot of questions about the legacy of this movement. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, history repeats itself. And I kind of feel like the Occupy Wall Street movement that we're seeing now is a repeat of what happened in the 60s. Back then it was the Vietnam War and Watergate. You know, very disillusioned population, especially young people. The first oil crisis in 1973 led us to think that, hey, maybe we better think about different ways of you know, making this, you know, having energy. Maybe we ought to think about solar power and wind power and geothermal power. But those weren't really getting much traction because, frankly, you know, our consumer society was really cranked up, and we got through it, and now we were back to big cars again. It just, I think we're now in a phase of history where people have had enough. And it's like, I'm mad as hell and I don't want to take it anymore. The network line.
Peter Finch and Network, when they all yell out the window.
And I've been wondering for years throughout the Iraq War and the Bush administration why more young people weren't standing up and complaining. And I'm very glad to see it's finally starting to happen. And ironically, it took what the press calls the Arab Spring to bring it out in our own country. But I think through social networking, through the internet, and frankly, the advent of small video cameras, it's changed the world. You can now, you know, have a huge audience for a small demonstration and be seen around the world. That didn't happen in 1968 and '69.
And also, not only is the media getting the new personal media getting us in touch with what's happening today globally, but it's also instant.
Right, absolutely.
You know, the delay isn't there, and it's also direct because, you know, if you think about in '68, '69, you know, the mainstream media, the corporate news media were how we understood the world. And even in '88, all of this was still in its infancy, but today it's it's an understanding that we are able to get events at the source, at the time it's happening. And, you know, I'm curious, throughout history, there's always been counterculture. What's its relationship to things like utopia, the idea of utopian ideals, separate societies? Spending all that time with these people, you know, and we heard a lot of them talk about the sense of, you know, wanting to fend for themselves and be on their own and not be beholden. Or, in fact, a couple people were, you know, pretty strongly pointing out they just couldn't, it did not feel ethical to them to give money to large corporations, knowing what they did. Is there a utopian ideal at work here? Is there a dream for a life that, you know, maybe one day won't be counter anymore, but will actually become mainstream?
Well, I think it already is happening. I mean, look at how the counterculture, the so-called counterculture, some would actually prefer to call it the brown rice culture, I'm told.
Is that right?
Yeah, because they don't want to be considered as separate necessarily.
Yeah, because counter's a negative word.
It's a negative thing,
yeah.
just like hippies is a negative thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that it's already with us. It's been integrated and assimilated, the values of the counterculture in so many ways from the 60s until today. I think we were, you know, who would have thought in 1968 or 88 that yoga would be a mainstream, you know, part of our lives?
I hadn't even thought of that.
Who would have thought that eating organic food, you know, that was like almost akin to like I think Skeeter says in our film, you know, being an organic farmer was close to being considered a communist back in those days. And now, you know, Walmart is and Safeway carry organic food. We've come a long way.
Yeah.
Eastern philosophy, child rearing, education, just, you know, let me count the ways. I mean, it's just everywhere that environmentalism, alternative energy, those were things that really were proposed and hoped for by the counterculture, and today we're seeing that these are in fact becoming a part of our lives. So I think that the legacy of the counterculture from the 60s and 70s it's definitely spawned the green movement of today, definitely has had influence on today's do-it-yourself movement, what's also called the downshifting movement, meaning, you know, we're tired of working at boring, meaningless jobs, and we're looking for real meaning in our lives, and people are getting back to that now. Whether that means, it doesn't mean that you have to move out to the country. And you know, grow your own organic food, build your own home from scratch, and live on next to nothing, which most of these people did. Which is why I have a lot of respect for their accomplishments.
It's more about,
it was tough.
Yeah, it's more about values than it is being defined by where and how. You know, it's not a geographic necessity. You know, the film makes a really fascinating turn when that one character, I've forgotten her name, becomes the de facto voice against the power line.
Mayawa.
Yes, and her encounter with the power structure, that was revelatory. It was revelatory because here she is in what you would assume is a small, close-knit community that is not the big city. You would think that, you know, the sense of a kind of lifestyle out there would be understood by the civic leadership and embraced. But that moment of conflict where they won't even make eye contact with her and she is calling them by first name. And that tells you how small the community absolutely brings to the forefront this idea of conflicting values. Off camera and through all of that, you know, how did she ultimately deal with that personally? Is she still there, and what has happened?
She's still there. Oh, absolutely. We're talking about Mayawa and Durosa, who live in the Methow Valley. They're still fighting the fight. In fact, the Washington State Land Commissioner, Mr. Goldmark, he has become involved in this project as well, because it involves, claiming land through eminent domain
Right.
for the state, and he's challenging that as well. And it's gone to the Attorney General, it's gone to the Supreme Court. This thing's been going on for about 13, 14 years now, and it still has not been decided.
And is she still involved?
She's still involved.
It was interesting because that was such a test of character for her. You could see it. She spoke to it. She said, I never wanted this to be what I was aspiring to. I'm not a civic leader. I don't want to be the representative.
That's right.
But I'm compelled to because it's my home. And
Right.
I thought that was fascinating. It's amazing.
It's not only my home, but she's looking at the long term as well instead of a short term fix.
Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of the clashes occur is, what's going to be sustainable,
Right.
and what's going to benefit the community in the long term, not
Right.
just what do we do to make a quick fix now
Right.
to bring in an alternative power line source.
Let's talk a little bit about your own life in the context of this. There's a great line in the film that says, possessions do not define us. And I thought it was pretty charming. You gave us a glimpse into your own life at the end of the film. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to sort of shift a bit of your own life out there and take part in this whole
Sure.
idea?
Well, I certainly was, having made a lot of trips back to Eastern Washington, and actually having gone to school in Eastern Washington too. I went to Washington State University. Can I say that on UWTV?
You can say that too. We'll just bleep it out. Yeah.
I felt a certain aesthetic, spiritual attraction to the area.
Okay.
And this is from having grown up here in what we call the wet coast.
Yeah.
We're 206ers over here
Yeah.
when they refer to us. But I loved it over there. I loved the solitude. I loved the just the vistas, the beautiful
Yeah.
area, and I fell in love with the place. And I thought, if I could find myself a little spot over here, rather than commuting back and forth 5 hours every time I wanted to do an interview, that would be great. And luckily, I was able to find something. It's kind of a funky, 20-year-old cabin, 400 square feet with an outhouse, but it has solar power. It's quiet, it's remote, it's in a place called Hippie Hill, so I guess I'm in the right district. And my wife and I use it as a getaway. We love it there, and we go there to kind of recharge our batteries when the city gets to be too much.
Sounds like part of you's become a part of that community.
Definitely, yeah, and it's a really unique community there that we both really enjoy, and we've met terrific people there, including forging a really deep, long-term relationship with Mayawa, DeRosa, and many others who are in our film. So that was one of the benefits.
So tell us what's next for Kevin Tomlinson, filmmaker.
Wow, that sounds funny hearing that even said out loud. Because this is my first film, and actually I have to share the credit with my wife, Judy Kaplan, because really it took both of us to get this film made. And as you know, it's a collaborative art form. It's very hard. I'm not an Orson Welles. I can't do it all, and even Orson Welles couldn't do it all. He had Greg Toland and a few other people involved. But I just really thank her, and she was instrumental in getting keeping my feet to the flame, as I like to say, making sure that we had deadlines so that we could get it done, because I wanted to get it done on the 40th anniversary of Woodstock, which was 2009.
Yeah.
We accomplished that.
That's fantastic.
We met our deadline. We certainly, we had no budget for this film. It was incredibly low. We basically self-funded this. So one of the things, it's been incredibly fulfilling, and there's been tremendous response. But the next film I make, I'd love to maybe work with I'd like to work with other people's money and fund it with grants and go out and actually ask people for money this time around, because I think we can do a better job with the production values and I just feel like we need to do that as filmmakers to take it to the next level. So the next project is about a photographer here in the Northwest. He's a very well-known internationally fine art photographer who's working a lot with the United Nations and with CARE. He's done several books, and he's involved a lot with gender inequality issues in the developing world. But not just the developing world, on a global level as well. And he has a fascinating backstory, which I think, you know, given the title of your series, you might be interested in at some point, hopefully. He was brought up as a Mormon, a very strict Mormon, went to BYU and then transferred to Berkeley in the 60s. What a transformation.
Wow.
What an incredible reinvention he had to go through. And the documentary is filled with reinventions. He went on to work as an orthodontist, and then later decided in his late 40s he wasn't being creative, and he wanted to find out more about fulfilling his creative side, and became a photographer. So it's got a lot of richness to it. I hope to bring that out.
Great.
He's a personal friend, so I have, as I say in documentary, access is 90% of success.
That's right.
I have great access, so let's hope it works out.
We're looking forward to it. Thanks, Kevin, for being here and
Thank
sharing
you.
all this on Backstory. It's absolutely been fantastic.
Really appreciate you having me.
Sure.
Thanks, Andrew.
And thank you for watching Backstory. I'm Andrew Tsao, and I will see you again behind the scenes.